The following program is brought to you by democracyatwork.info. Broadcasting from a U.S. colony, my name is Andrew Mercado-Vázquez, and this is Puerto Rico Forward, a program that takes a look at the economic and legal structures at play between the United States of North America and Puerto Rico. As a territorial property of the U.S., Congress can decide to make or break Puerto Rico's economy. With little more than a stroke of a pen, one law is enough to deeply affect the daily lives of millions of American citizens, who, by the way, have no vote on the matter. Now, throughout its colonial relationship with the U.S., Puerto Rico has been subject to a wide range of economic policies, embodied in a plethora of laws and regulations. On today's episode, I will be discussing two pieces of legislation that stand on opposite sides in regards to Puerto Rico's economic development, and I'll also be discussing why I believe both failed to provide real long-term economic development. The first is Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren's bill titled the Puerto Rico and USVI Equitable Rebuild Act of 2017. Now, the general idea of this bill is to provide Puerto Rico and the United States Virgin Islands with about $146 billion in aid to be invested in infrastructure, education, renewable energy, and economic development. Of course, after being on the receiving end of Hurricane Maria, one of the most destructive natural forces to sweep through the Caribbean, both territories were left in shambles and in desperate need for recovery assistance. Now, some have actually compared the bill to the Marshall Plan, a recovery program that provided over $13 billion to European countries so they could finance their economic recovery in the wake of World War II. Now, the comparison is interesting given the fact that the Marshall Plan was actually a move in favor of American interests, although many have pointed out that it's an example of good deed foreign policy. The reality is that the U.S. foreign policy, like many other countries, is self-interest driven. In other words, what's good for you needs to be great for me, otherwise I will not do it. In the case of the Marshall Plan, the self-interest motive was twofold. First off, it helped prevent the spread of communism from Eastern Europe by establishing a large presence of North American capital and providing the necessary liquidity for local government to provide essential services to the European population. As a result, capitalism, not communism, was able to claim a favorable position in the eyes of the general public. The other perk for U.S. interests was the establishment of markets that were highly receptive to U.S. capital goods. Now, some of you might be wondering why I'm telling you so much about the Marshall Plan. The answer is that I don't think the Sanders-Warren bill should be compared to it at all. First off, their purposes are completely different. As mentioned before, the Marshall Plan was aligned with U.S. interests because it prevented the spread of communism beyond Eastern Europe, and because it provoked the acceptance of capitalism and capitalist investments. What equivalent would we find in the Sanders-Warren bill? None, really. You see, the only reason for the U.S. government to spend $13 billion on a recovery package was because it was the path of least resistance to accomplish its goal: create new markets for U.S. capitalist investment. The case of Puerto Rico is completely different due to the fact that no resistance is possible, since the U.S. literally owns it. Congress has plenary powers over the archipelago, so if it wants anything from it, all it has to do is legislate. You see, that's why I don't foresee this bill being approved. Although it would be the right thing to do, there is no real payoff for the U.S. in return. Thus, the self-interest motive is not satisfied. And if you want to see a prime example of the U.S.'s self-interest motive in action, look no further than the second piece of legislation we'll be discussing in today's episode, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Now this, ladies and gentlemen, is a real piece of work. Signed into law on December 22, 2017 by President Donald J. Trump, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is the most aggressive U.S. tax reform in over 30 years. Said legislation is so extensive that it would take many episodes of this program just to provide a general outline of it. For this reason, I will only provide a basic review of the content that is most relevant to Puerto Rico, starting with Section 11011, which is entitled Deduction of Qualified Business Income. Simply put, this section of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act amends the U.S. Internal Revenue Code by adding new text, Section 199A. And the purpose of it is to provide a definition for what is considered qualified business income. Now, in regards to Puerto Rico, the most important part of said text is subsection 199A F1C, titled Treatments of Trades or Businesses in Puerto Rico. Now, said statute reads in part, and I quote, "In the case of any taxpayer with qualified business income from sources within the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, if any such income is taxable under Section 1 for such taxable year, then for purposes of determining the qualified business income of such taxpayer for such taxable year, the term United States shall include the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico." End of quote. As we can see quite early in the bill, Puerto Rico's status allows Congress to manage its possession however it likes. In this case, certain income from sources in Puerto Rico will be considered as emanating from the U.S. if certain requirements are met. In other words, Puerto Rico occupies a bizarre legal space, and because of this, Congress can do as it pleases, like acting as if it's a part of the U.S. even though it's not. Remember, as I explained in past episodes, Puerto Rico belongs to, but is not a part of the U.S. Now, moving right along, Section 12001 of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is titled Repeal of Tax for Corporations. And if we jump to subsection 12001B4, we arrive to another gift from Congress to Puerto Rico. Now, essentially, what this part of the law does is amend Section 55C1 of the Internal Revenue Code by removing any mention of two other sections from the Internal Revenue Code, Section 936 and Section 30A. It's important to point out, however, that Section 936 was phased out by the Clinton administration back in 1996 through the Small Business Job Protection Act. But when it was good law, it actually allowed U.S. domestic corporations to claim certain income from business activities within a U.S. possession as a credit against taxes imposed at the federal level. Now, on the other hand, Section 30A did nothing more than actually provide the legal structure to that phasing out, which actually lasted until 2006, by the way. But it really isn't until you arrive to Section 14202 of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that you really can see the true shift in Congress's view towards Puerto Rico. Now, this section is titled Deduction for Foreign-Derived Intangible Income and Global Intangible Low-Taxed Income. Under it, Puerto Rico becomes subject to an additional tax due to the fact that it is treated as a foreign jurisdiction. The direct effect of this text is that a 12.5% tax will be applied to any income generated from intellectual property. In other words, patents, copyrights, trademarks, etc., held by foreign companies outside the U.S. Under this law, Puerto Rico is considered a foreign jurisdiction, as I already mentioned, and as a result, companies in Puerto Rico are treated as foreign corporations even if they are subsidiaries of U.S. mainland companies. The logic behind applying this tax to Puerto Rico is so flawed, it actually reaches farcical levels when you realize that these companies, most notably the pharmaceutical industry that accounts for about 90,000 jobs in Puerto Rico, are employing American citizens. This law could potentially endanger thousands of American jobs. What's the short title of this bill again? The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So are jobs held by Puerto Rican American citizens not worthy of the same supposed desire to create and sustain new jobs? Unless, of course, Puerto Rican jobs aren't considered American jobs, at least not held by the same kind of American citizens. This certainly seems to be the case when one considers that Puerto Rico will have to bear the loss of a key incentive to attract much-needed investment to the archipelago. Multinationals would face the same intellectual property tax whether they chose to operate in Puerto Rico or Ireland, for example. But it is true that it's too early to have a clear idea as to the actual repercussions that this bill will have in Puerto Rico. But regardless, after being in an 11-plus year recession, having crushing public debt, and getting hit by a disastrous hurricane, Puerto Rico finds itself hanging by a thread, far too affected to be able to absorb any further economic hits. But leave it to Congress to come up with a new and creative way to step on our throat. At the end of the day, neither of the two bills actually touches on the most important issue to Puerto Rico's economy, its political status. As explained in other episodes of this program, the U.S. government has placed Puerto Rico in a type of legal limbo from which it cannot escape on its own. Puerto Rico belongs to, but is not, a part of the U.S. At least that's what the United States Supreme Court has said. As a result, Puerto Rico is neither a state of the Union, nor is it a sovereign republic, but rather a piece of U.S. property. As such, Congress can decide when to treat Puerto Rico as a foreign jurisdiction and when to treat it as a state of the Union, as it has done in the past. This has not only proven to be problematic, but has also been the source of a lot of Puerto Rico's economic instability. A prime example is the already mentioned Section 936 of the Internal Revenue Code. Now, it was placed in order to drive investment into Puerto Rico, but it was removed by Congress and phased out up to 2006. Now, by having this type of back and forth action from Congress regarding to Puerto Rico's economic policy, it makes it extremely hard, basically impossible, to be able to develop a long-term economic plan without fearing that at one point Congress is just going to pull the rug from under your feet. And you know, that's the whole point of Puerto Rico in Congress's eyes. Puerto Rico is whatever Congress needs it to be a state or a foreign jurisdiction. And before some of you start to blame the current Republican government for Puerto Rico's woes, let me remind you that the Puerto Rico issue has existed for 120 years now. Neither party has had the dignity to muster up the political desire, interest, or willpower to address it with the urgency and dignity it deserves. So no, you can't blame the other party for the modern colony that Puerto Rico is, because as far as history is concerned, neither has given half a damn. On the contrary, this arrangement has worked quite well for Puerto Rico's colonial masters, both Democrat and Republican, because in many ways, Puerto Rico is not treated as an actual place, but rather as a concept. The concept of Puerto Rico is so malleable that it can be a state for one law and be a foreign territory for another. This legal duality allows Congress to approach Puerto Rico not as an archipelago inhabited by over 3 million American citizens, but as a useful idea. And that is as far from democracy as you can get. Now, before closing off the episode, I just wanted to share with you some exciting news about Puerto Rico Forward. Now we have a Facebook page. So if you have a moment, please look us up as Puerto Rico Forward on Facebook. Give us a like, share some of our videos, maybe share with me some interesting articles you might find about Puerto Rico. Leave a comment. I'll be there daily. I'll swing by once in a while and try to interact with you guys. And also, you can write to me directly at our email, which is puertoricoforward@gmail.com. Now, I'd love to receive messages from you guys letting me know what you like about the episode, what you like about the program in general, what you would like me to add to it, maybe a subject or two that you're most interested in about Puerto Rico's economy or law, whatever, really. I love making the podcast, but I love it even more when you guys interact. As always, thank you for listening, thank you for your time, y que viva Puerto Rico.